Welcome to 𝐊𝐴𝐴 TV's new segment, Crypto Talks. I'm Sage, and we're going to bring you some of the biggest names from the cryptocurrency space to help you understand how you can create passive income streams. And using the insights from the sector's leaders will help you to make the wise business decisions to suit your lifestyle and current financial situation. So today we're very lucky to have Mr. Stephen Livera, who has a major global podcast on in-depth economic and technical information on Bitcoin, which is available via Twitter and his website, stephenlivera.com. He's also a university lecturer on Bitcoin and the co-founder of the Ministry of Nodes. So welcome, Stephen. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Hi, Sage. Thank you for inviting me.
Excellent. Well, I'm sure our audience can't wait to hear from you. So without any further delay, let's get started. So Bitcoin recently emerged as the biggest cryptocurrency with a $1 trillion US economy. What do you think fueled this crypto rally?
So Bitcoin is undergoing this broader adoption phase. So I view it like it's a hard money, there are different ways to frame it, but I think the most useful way is to think of it like long-term savings technology. Now, 2020 changed a lot of things for a lot of people. I think that was the catalyst for a lot of people to start thinking more seriously about Bitcoin. And there are other leaders in the space, people like Michael Saylor and so on from MicroStrategy, who came out very strongly on this whole idea of using it as a treasury reserve. So I think what we are seeing is more and more adoption amongst large companies, small companies, individuals, high net worth, family office, just the whole lot. And we are also seeing people use it even in the developing world, right? This is not just a tech bro or rich investor thing. People in the developing world are adopting Bitcoin also. So I think in a nutshell, it's broadly the adoption of Bitcoin as a long-term savings technology.
Wonderful. That's a very positive way to look at this emerging type of currency, internet currency, which could possibly one day be the currency of the world. So Bitcoin mania has put cryptocurrency on the map in the investment space amid COVID-19, as you've just mentioned. And what is your take on the ongoing gold versus Bitcoin debate?
Well, okay, now I obviously am biased maybe, but I think Bitcoin is succeeding where gold failed, unfortunately. Now, it's not that gold itself failed, but it fell in some sense victim to a certain level of control and co-opting, and where Bitcoin, I think, is showing that it is just fundamentally a superior monetary technology. Now, it'll take time for people to understand this, because some people will say things like, oh, look, the Lindy effect, or this gold has been around for 5,000 years. But at the same time, you wouldn't say, oh, we've been riding on horses for thousands of years. Why would you use that car over there? Well, no, I'm sorry. The Bitcoin is like just a better technology. It's a better way to save, and it provides better assurances that the fiat banking world cannot provide, and that the gold banking world simply cannot provide. You can't send that gold cheaply internationally without trusting somebody, which is what Bitcoin allows. And I think as I mentioned, 2020 changed a lot of things. So what we are now seeing is a lot of asset inflation, and unfortunately, gold has not kept pace. Bitcoin's average returns over the last, if you look at the numbers over the last 10 years or so, it's something like 160 CAGR. That's compound annualized growth rate. Gold is something like, I don't know, 4 or 5%. It's just nowhere near the level.
Okay, that's very interesting insights from you, because I understand that gold can be traded as an electronic cryptocurrency as well, and it's got its underlying asset, but you need to have actual bullions there underneath it. But Bitcoin doesn't need to have anything securing it.
Let me explain with that, actually, Sage. So one of the things, if you wanted to think about it this way, if you want to move gold around the world, you're going to have to pay security guards. You're going to have to verify that it really is gold. You might get blocked. There are famous examples where one government has been holding gold for another, and unfortunately they got blocked. And so unfortunately, in that case, it's not the kind of thing where you can have a cryptocurrency and have it backed by gold, because at the end of the day, what's backing it? It's the gold, and the gold still has to physically move around. Whereas with Bitcoin, you don't have to trust. So one way to frame it, and some people call it this is Bitcoin is the money of enemies, right? You could pay your worst enemy, and using the Bitcoin software, they don't have to trust the other person. They can independently see, oh yes, these Bitcoins incoming have hit my Bitcoin wallet. So that's an important differentiator that people have to understand around gold versus Bitcoin.
Wow, absolutely. Thank you for that. That's really mind expanding information there. Let's move on to the next question. So Bitcoin seems to be undergoing a sharp pullback in its valuation since mid-April 2021. Is it an indication of a cryptocurrency crash, or is there still some steam left? And precisely, do you think Bitcoin is a new asset class, or is it just a bubble all the time?
Yeah, so looking back to what happened in 2017, essentially there were 4 or 5 pullbacks around 20 or 30% on the way up. So this is coming from, at that time, the all-time high prior was 2013, 1200. And then in 2015 and 16, it started coming back up again. And all along the way, there were 30% pullbacks. And so what we saw was the recent peak was around 64,000, and then it dropped to maybe 48, 49,000 in that range in US dollar terms. And now as we speak, we're sitting around 57,000 US dollar terms. So I view this as a part of the broader overarching cycle. We're still probably in the middle of this overarching bull run, but of course there will be pullbacks and drops along the way up. Now, some in the Bitcoin community believe that we're entering a quote unquote super cycle or the final cycle, that this is the moment where we hit the tipping point. My view is actually we're not going to hit that this time around. I think it may be the next or the one after. So Bitcoin tends to move in these 4-year cycles. And so my best guess, if you will, is that we're going to continue to see this bull run go, I believe, into the 6 figures, well into the 6 figures, multiple 6 figures, and then probably crash, unfortunately, because I think what happens is the market overextends. And so every time it sort of overextends, and then after a while, we sort of have to have a bit of a bear cycle to sort of clean out the trash, as it were. And then in 4 years' time, we go around again. And we've seen this happen multiple times in Bitcoin's history. So there definitely is precedent for this idea of 80% drawdown, but then recovery from that. And I guess to your second question, which was around, is this a big bubble and so on? I think the way to think about that is we have to understand that a lot of people are fundamentally using this technology. They use it to send money home to their family in other countries. They use it to receive money under adversarial conditions. They use it to save when they are living in a highly inflationary scenario. We have to remember that billions of people on this earth live under some form of authoritarian regime, and they do not necessarily have access to the ability to save into something that goes up over the long term. And so that's fundamentally the way to think about Bitcoin, is it is a technology that achieves what normal fiat banking fundamentally will not give us.
Exactly. It definitely is giving us an alternative way of looking at how things could be operating. And in regards to what China and India are doing, banning cryptocurrency in a few months, that's going to be very interesting to see the impact that has. I mean, if a tweet from Elon Musk can have such a big effect, I wonder what the governments of these powerhouse nations will have on the currency. So it'll be interesting maybe to talk to you again at that time, if possible.
Yeah, sure. And I think one thing to consider there is that even though it might be quote unquote banned, there's still a lot of peer-to-peer trading. And in fact, even in countries like Nigeria and so on, we're seeing more and more peer-to-peer trading. So I think it's one of those things where you can't really stop this thing. The best that a government might be able to do is slow it down in their country. But even then, it just pushes people elsewhere. And so I think people have tried banning it many times, and I don't think they'll be successful long-term.
Okay. So global liquidity has sent the stock markets over the roof. How far do you think the liquidity factor has impacted the surge in cryptocurrencies, please?
So, Sage, I would say this is the chase for yield. There's a lot of people who unfortunately they don't have a better choice. So, and they have, in many cases around the world, people can't access the property market. They feel locked out. They feel that their income, the multiple for the kind of property that they would have to buy, historically, if we went back into the 70s or the 80s, it might have been 3 or 4x your earnings multiple, as in the house that you buy might be 4 times your annual salary. Nowadays, it might be 10x, it might be 15x, it might be 20x or more, depending on where you live. So I think there's been a bit of disillusionment, and because of all the money printing and stimulus checks and so on, people are looking for alternatives. Now, some of them are trying to gamble on random altcoins like Dogecoin or whatever, or meme stocks, right? The GameStop fiasco. But fundamentally, people are just looking for alternatives, and Bitcoin is, I think, going to, the cream rises to the top over time.
Exactly. Now, some of the smaller cryptos like Ethereum, is that how you say it? That seems to be surging at the moment. Do you think it would ever have a chance of catching up to Bitcoin and be a closer second or even a first?
Long term, no. I think, of course, during these bull cycles, what happens is, because Bitcoin is just so much bigger, it won't pump as crazy because it's already coming off a larger base. Whereas some of these smaller coins coming off a smaller base can pump higher. But in terms of the actual fundamentals of Ethereum, they're terrible. Ethereum had a 70% pre-mine, as in they gave themselves and a bunch of their friends 70% of the coins at the start. Bitcoin was open from the start. And Ethereum has numerous sort of technical issues with it, and that I think longer term, I don't even see why it's really going to exist longer term. But, of course, people are free to try. I just would highly, recommend staying away.
All right, thank you. And unlike most other asset classes, we've touched on this a little, cryptocurrencies do not have any underlying assets. It is purely playing on trust and speculation factor, as you've also touched on. How far do you think the crypto boom is sustainable, please?
So I see it like there is going to be a lot of random trash riding the coattails of Bitcoin. And unfortunately, the industry has, if you will, there's a lot of people who sort of market themselves by saying, oh, look, we're better than Bitcoin or whatever. Now, some of that was a 2017 thing. This cycle around, we are still seeing a lot of people who come out with maybe a paper thin justification for creating their own coin because, hey, who wouldn't want to be the one who prints the new money? So I think, unfortunately and sadly, a fool and his money are soon parted. So there will be a lot of people who fall prey to these things. Whereas those of us who are focused on Bitcoin are thinking of this more like a long-term savings thing. So we see this going to multiple millions of dollars per coin longer term, but we're focused on this idea of saving into Bitcoin and maybe transacting in Bitcoin if we have been blocked from the normal system, but we sort of save into this, into Bitcoin, basically. So I guess to bring it back to answer your question, I think there will be a lot of new people coming into the space. Those people will be easily fooled because they haven't sort of done the reading and research, understanding, listening to the podcasts and so on to understand what's actual signal and what's just noise.
That is a brilliant segue to our next question, in fact. Some experts are suggesting that the cryptocurrency rally is based on a greater fool theory. And what is your take on it?
I think we should frame it more like Bitcoin is being valued because of its credibility in terms of its supply cap. So we know there will never be more than 21 million Bitcoins. There's a community. It's a very strongly enforced thing. Whereas with altcoins, that kind of is true. I think the greater fool thing is there because oftentimes they can rug pull you and change the conditions, or there have been numerous hacks and exploits on various, altcoin smart quote unquote smart contract platforms where, there's some flaw in the contract and people just drain the contract out of all its funds. Whereas in the Bitcoin world, it's all about that credibility. And it's all about this idea that anybody can join. It's an open, permissionless system. And there's no one person, there's no one government or company in charge. Whereas with many of the altcoins, it is literally quite true that there is a company or a foundation in charge. And so that they often have a marketing budget, whereas Bitcoin has volunteers.
Okay, so it's a decentralized finance in the true sense of the word. And
Yeah, that's right. Go on.
where do you see prices of Bitcoin going in the next 1 year? At the moment, the market cap is over $1 trillion US. Do you see it topping the six-figure mark?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I should caveat, I don't have a crystal ball, but if I had to guess where I think things are going this year, I believe, yeah, we're going into the multi-hundreds of thousands. So if I had to guess, I think we could have a blow off top, like 300K, but then I think it'll crash, right? So I think the most likely scenario is that more and more people will come in, and then towards the end of this year, early next year, we'll start to see a real frenzy. And then that's where we may see a blow off top and a crash back down. And then people will sort of have to grind it out for another 3 or 4 years before the next cycle comes again. But I think the kind of the bottom of the next crash, if you will, if I had to guess, I think it'll be like kind of 60 or 70K in USD terms. So that's kind of my estimate of where I see it going. But eventually one of these days we'll sort of hit a certain level of adoption that it'll just like, it'll basically go up and not really have that huge drawdown. Now that's the big question on everyone's mind is, have we reached that point? And I think ultimately a lot of those people are basically saying this time is different. And I think, unfortunately, of course, I would love, for the world to just adopt Bitcoin. I think this time is not different. I think we have not reached that point yet. I believe that may come in the future, but I'm playing that long game. And I would I would suggest for people listening who are thinking about this, that if you want to get involved, you really have to learn and think of it as a long-term perspective.
Exactly. Not really meant to do anything half-heartedly, and something where you're going to invest your money into, especially, sounds like you should be doing a lot of background reading and research. So on the day when first cryptocurrency exchange Coinbase got listed in the US, we saw first inverse Bitcoin ETF being rolled out in Canada, which will allow investors to take short positions in futures. Do you think Bitcoin is overdue for a correction?
I would say we are still in the middle of this bull cycle. So in Bitcoin, it's possible to do various kinds of analytics and on-chain analytics. And I guess that's a bit confusing because in the normal fiat, US dollar or Australian banking world, you can't sort of look and see where all the money flows are. But in Bitcoin, you can. And we can see that essentially a lot of the long-term holders, they are not selling their coins. And so what we can see is essentially that, based on some of those indicators, so again, some of this is kind of guesswork, a little bit of art, a little bit of science, but I think we are still in the middle of this run. So fundamentally speaking, people are still trying to accumulate Bitcoin, and we are not really near that kind of toppy level that I would say, yeah, we're kind of towards the top of the cycle. I still think we're very much in the middle of the bull run right now. Of course, it's always difficult to know, right? People can look back from the future and say, oh, see, actually, yeah, you were wrong. That was close to the top. But I genuinely believe we are sort of in the middle of this cycle, and that, people being able to take a short position, like people can already do shorts on various Bitcoin exchanges around the world. The liquidity on this thing is growing. I don't think it'll have a huge impact relative to where we are in the broader cycle. If I had to guess, I think towards the end of this year is where we would see that happen.
Okay. Well, looking at the troughs and the waves that it's been creating, it does seem to be some sort of a upward trend, as you say. And looking over the last few years, Bitcoin seems to have crashed in January or towards the end of the year, which you've mentioned could be a possibility as well. So some very valuable insights there coming out of this discussion about the 4-year cycles, and the fact that it could be reaching its heights towards the end of the year before a maybe significant crash. So I think that's our 20 minutes almost up, unfortunately. I'd love to talk longer to you on the subject because you're obviously very passionate about it and have a lot of valuable insights. But before we go, would you like to share some tips for investors seeking exposure to the crypto space?
So my tip would be do a lot of reading and learning about Bitcoin. Obviously, subscribe to my show, the Stephen Livera podcast. I think that is honestly one of the fastest ways to get up to speed and actually spend your time genuinely learning about Bitcoin and focusing on the economics of it, the technology of it, the kind of how it all works together, because that is what gives you the conviction and the knowledge to play the long game, and that actually do what we call stacking sats, right? Which is accumulating a little bit every week. Because I think it's one of those things where if you think you're just going to, oh, I'll leave that to later, but actually the more important thing to do is actually do your learning and then set up a dollar cost average plan where you can sign up on some various Bitcoin brokers or exchanges, and they will set you up, and you can basically do however much you're comfortable with, $50 a week, $100 a week, whatever it is. And then that's the way that you build up your position. But I have to stress, it's a long-term play. It's not a get rich quick. This is something about, you have to sort of understand what we're doing here, which is fundamentally replacing the monetary layer of society, and that we believe there's a huge wealth transfer occurring over this, call it 10, 20 years period, but you have to really do your learning and listening and reading to understand what this is.
Exactly. And it's some sort of a coincidence that we're speaking today when the Reserve Bank is meeting today about their monetary policy. And I suppose, the way that money's created by the Fed reserves and the quantitative easing, and it's just printed out of nowhere, it does kind of make sense that there is a space for an alternative currency like Bitcoin and internet currency. So it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you today, Stephen. And hopefully we get a chance to talk again as things emerge and we come out of what's been somewhat of an economic downturn with the pandemic. It's been a fabulous show. And as we say at 𝐊𝐴𝐴𝐿𝐼𝐴, stay wise and apprised and invest wise. This is Sage signing off.